not just the only country in Europe to engage in such actions, but it is shamefully and uniquely proud of its actions, looking to be seen as a trailblazer in targeting the Jewish state. Ireland's actions do not serve the cause of peace. Ireland's actions simply emboldens extremist Palestinian factions, from Hamas double war crimes to the Palestinian Authority's pay-for-slay policy, which incentivizes and rewards the murder of Jews regardless of whether they are children, women or men. Ireland's actions distances our nation from its ambition to contribute and play a constructive role in efforts at a peaceful resolution. Ireland's actions reward Iranian sponsorship of Hamas and Islamic Jihad rockets, 4,500 of which were fired indiscriminately into Israeli towns and cities over 11 days this month, the vast majority of which were intercepted by Israel's aerial defense system, the Iron Dome, but which had Israeli children, women and men running backwards and forwards to bomb shelters over 11 days, in some instances with just 15 seconds to run for their lives. Friends, as we stand here today, we remember the 13 Israelis, including 2 children, who were killed by Iranian-sponsored rockets raining down on Israel as the Iron Dome system was overwhelmed. May their memories be a blessing, and may they rest in peace. We also remember, as we stand here today, their grieving families and friends, some of whom are Irish citizens resident in this country, as well as over 1,800 Israeli citizens who were wounded and others who had their homes and businesses destroyed. I will finish by reiterating once more what I said to the Joint Committee on Foreign Affairs and Defence when I was invited to speak there on the 13th of May, but which sadly appears to have fallen on deaf ears. I asked the Foreign Affairs Committee to ensure that any decisions they make of relevance to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or which could detrimentally impact upon Israel, does not exclude Ireland from playing a practical role in reigniting a viable peace process, and that decisions made by the Irish government are ones that encourage and promote peace, not division, remembering that truth does not always belong to those who shout the loudest. Thank you. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Paul Coulter of the Irish branch of the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much for coming. It's wonderful this afternoon that we can stand with the nation of Israel. And we have a very simple message this afternoon. On behalf of Christians, on behalf of Jews, on behalf of Israelis, on behalf of secular members of Irish society, we gather today to say one thing. Israel, you are not alone. And as we've heard, the context of our gathering is that once again, Hamas has rained unprecedented numbers of rockets on the cities and the civilian population of Israel. Once again, there are howls of condemnation across the world and in our own country also. Israel has the audacity, has the temerity, has the sheer cheek to defend herself and to strike back at Hamas missile launch sites and terror tunnels. It's not acceptable. Let us not be deceived. The issue is not property rights in East Jerusalem. The issue is not so-called settlements. The Hamas charter that I think Paddy passed out earlier is clear and unambiguous. At issue is the very existence of the State of Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people. The goal of Hamas is the total destruction of the State of Israel. Do not be deceived. Furthermore, the enemies of Israel have found allies for their cause among the nations of the world, even allies in Ireland. They found support among those very nations that stood silent 100 years ago, during a dark time when European Jewry faced the same threat, that of their very existence. And we hear voices again that we thought that we would never hear. Voices in the media, voices in the United Nations, voices on the streets of Dublin and across Ireland, and shamefully, voices among our own public representatives also. Voices that once again single out the Jewish nation for special attention. Let us not be deceived what they call for. We hear the chants. We read their placards. At least they're honest about what they call for. Listen, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. These voices are not new voices. They've existed since the birth of the Jewish nation by covenant to Abraham 4,000 years ago. The Bible even sums up their deadly message in a very unique way. Let me read it to you. It's found in Psalm 83 verses 2 to 4 in that wonderful book that the Jewish people have gifted to the world. This is what it says. Don't you hear the tumult and commotion of your enemies? Don't you see what they are doing, these proud men who hate the Lord? They're full of craftiness. They plot against your people, laying plans to slay your precious ones. Come, they say, let us wipe out Israel as a nation. We will destroy the very memory of her existence. These are ancient words, but they're absolutely up to date at this very moment in time. So the enemies of Israel are not a new phenomenon. And they call for the destruction of Israel. And their words are deadly. And they're as intentional as those over 4,000 rockets that were rained down by Hamas on Israeli homes. And let us make no mistake, they weren't just Jewish homes, they were Arab homes as well. They make no distinction. And they speak words that demonize Israel, single her out for treatment that is unique among the 200 or more nations of the earth. Rockets or words. The means may differ, but the objective is always the same. What is that objective? The total destruction of the state of Israel. Well, if that was all to it, I wouldn't be here this afternoon. But you know, there's another voice speaking. And it's the voice that called the heavens and the earth into existence. It's the voice that called the nation of Israel into existence. It's the voice that calls himself the God of Israel. And there is no other voice with a big V. And let me tell you what that voice says to Israel and to the nations of the world. We find it in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 11. For I am with you, says the Lord, to save you. Though I make a full end of all the nations where I have scattered you, yet I will not make a complete end of you. So God says, I am with you, Israel, to save you. And God says, be warned, nations. You've picked a fight with God. Be encouraged, Israel. If you're Israelis here today, be encouraged. Your God is with you. Your God is for you. Despite the rockets, despite the voices, despite the threats of the mullahs in Iran, your survival is assured. Your God will have the last word on this matter. You are not alone. And just finally, I'd like to direct my remarks to the Israeli ambassador and to any Israelis who are here this afternoon with us. Around the world, there are countless millions who love the God of Israel. There are millions of evangelical Christians who stand with Israel. In Africa, the Americas, Asia, the Far East, China, they're even found in countries who are your neighbors. In Egypt, Jordan, Algeria, and even in Iran itself. And we've met and spoken to some of them on the streets of Jerusalem. And then even in Israel, there are courageous Arabs who love you and stand with you. And their message to you and our message to you is a simple one. You are not alone. Thank you.